Um, um, Russia, a hostile foreign government whose aim is to weaken our democracy and sow discord in our country, will try to interfere again in the 2018 elections. But because of no presidential leadership and counterproductive action in Congress, however, our election infrastructure is still very vulnerable. Some evidence of this is some states and local governments still don't use paper ballots. In 2016, as you said, the hackers tried to penetrate at least 21 states. Well, they got into the state of Illinois' voter registration rolls. They were there for a few weeks downloading data. They were downloading data from the state of Illinois' voting system until they were caught. And then last year, there's a Russian-affiliated hacking group called Fancy Bear. Well, Fancy Bear set up a false website that was mimicking the U.S. Senate's website. They were there and purportedly to get logins and passwords to later release documents. To protect our nation, the Commander-in-Chief should lead an interagency effort to shore our voting systems, combat disinformation, and stop foreign actors from clandestinely influencing American decision-making. But he's doing none of this. This is a dereliction of duty, Congressman. He's our president, and he should really take a step up to the plate and do his job. He calls any mention of interference a hoax, which leads some people to believe that these threats are false, making our democracy more susceptible. Now, as the gentleman said, he's now implementing the new sanctions meant to punish Russia for election interference. Now, sir, I understand that you're in the legislative branch, and I understand that usually the president has the authority to run foreign policy. But in this case, considering what the Russians did to our democracy, and considering what they're doing to our democracy now, I mean, they're still doing influence measures right now. They need to be punished. We need to send a message that isn't acceptable. And so that's why I think the Congress should do its diligence, should do its oversight, enact its oversight responsibility, and say, hey, Mr. President, you need to do this. And then one more thing, and I'll let you. Similarly, in the Congress, other than the Senate Intelligence Committee, the other Republican-led committees aren't going after those that attacked our democracy. They're going after the patriotic Americans and federal law enforcement and investigating these attacks and trying to stop future intrusion and deliberately confusing and misleading the public.
Please let him finish.
With false narratives that recklessly and needlessly expose classified intelligence information. And incidentally, Russian bots, believe it or not, Russian bots puts the quote-unquote release the memo hashtag because they wanted to compromise our intelligence gathering methods. And so, with all due respect, Congressman, how can people in the House, especially like Paul Ryan, Devin Nunes, and those people, defend themselves when they risk our national security by compromising our national intelligence resources? And how can they not hold the president to be account for his failure to implement new sanctions?
Well, first of all, it's up, as I said, it's up to the president to make that decision. Sanctions would not, excuse me, let me finish. I can say that unilateral sanctions by the United States will not be effective unless Europe imposes the same sanctions, because the Russians will simply trade with Europe rather than trading with the United States. This has got, may I answer this question, please, without interruption? This is the second time I've said this in answer to this question. I would hope that I would be able to answer the question and we can continue with the meeting. Secondly, under Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, elections are run by the states. Now, I personally favor having some kind of a paper trail if people vote electronically. And I fought for that when I was in the legislature, a while ago on that. And I think that, there have been, enough anomalies, that have occurred, whether it was criminal in nature or probably just some kind of a programming mistake or operational mistake by the election judges that actually checked the voters in, that would end up doing that. But what I will say is that, I agree that, we cannot compromise our sources and methods. And if the president were completely free to say what is being done to try to stop the Russians from doing this in the midterm elections, he would be telling the Russians what our technology is, and they would just simply figure out a way to go around it. They're really pretty good at doing that. Now, Russian interference in elections is nothing new. There was interference in the 2016 election in a number of ways. They interfered with the Brexit vote in England. They interfered with the elections last year that were held in France and Germany. And a lot of that was done was to disrupt the people who live in these historically democratic countries from having confidence that their elections have been fairly run and fairly represent the views of the people who voted in that election. Right. I can say that Russian interference in American election has gone back to Soviet times. They were interfering with the elections as early as 1960. So, this is something that is new. Now, we've got to watch out for this. I can say that they did try to get into Wisconsin elections, right. And when the Green Party candidate demanded and paid for a statewide recount, this was something that was being looked at very closely by the then Government Accountability Board that ran elections, and by the local county clerks and the county boards of canvassers. And apparently they were not successful in doing that. But they're going to keep on trying, and we just can't tell them what we're going to do to stop them, because the geeks in Moscow will be able to, or wherever, will be able to come up with whatever. But the bottom line is not to change the outcome of the election. They got into Illinois. Well, Clinton carried Illinois by a big margin, so if they were trying to help Trump out, that was not the place to do it. But the thing is that they tried here. We know what stopped them. That is being told to elections officials in other states. But the bottom line is that they want to destroy the confidence of the voters that the election was fairly run and that there was a fair outcome when the votes have been tallied and added up.
Well, a couple things. The sanctions. The reason why the Europeans aren't going to, we already have sanctions for annexing Crimea, and if I'm not mistaken, the European countries participated in those sanctions. So
yeah, and the Russians are still there and in eastern Ukraine.
Absolutely. So I don't think that's a reason for Trump to not sign the law. Not Trump. I don't think that's a reason for Trump not to follow through on the law that he signed. Well, he veto-proof majority last year. So I don't think that's a reason for, in any case, for us to actually implement those sanctions.
Well, it would be up to him to explain why he didn't do that. In Congress, we did our job. Give us a little credit what credit is due, okay?
Well, sir, then
yeah.
Why? Well, be that as it may. And then the other issue is about the classified intelligence. See, what the Republicans did a week and a half ago is what you're saying about not giving away secrets. That's what they did. By listing the dates of when Carter Page was surveilled, the man in question in that memo, I believe strongly that Paul Ryan should have stepped in and said, no, we know that this memo, it wasn't redacted. In other words, there's information in that is top secret, and then the memo was not redacted. Now, I believe that's very irresponsible for them to do that.
Well, it was sent to the president. The president could have had the FBI and the intelligence community redact any of the material in the Nunes memorandum. They chose not to do that. And again, the exact timing, of the Carter Page surveillance and the relationship with Fusion GPS, that was in the public press since about last October. Now, just a minute, Senator Grassley sent a memo up to the FBI referring Christopher Steele to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. I have it here with me. it ended up being heavily redacted. You know, I'm just showing this here, and all the things that are blacked out, you know, are the redactions in that. And only after it was redacted, you know, was it released. So, you know, this is a Republican memo that did not emanate from the Intelligence Committee, but ended up, you know, what needed to be redacted, you know, according to the FBI and the intelligence community, ended up, you know, being redacted on this. Now, you know, I don't know what was objectionable, you know, in the Schiff memo that the president refused to declassify last weekend. I haven't read it, you know, and I don't read those kinds of things, you know, simply because if I do that, you know, I can't comment on it in public. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that is in those memos ending up being released to the press before they are declassified anyhow. But, you know, we shouldn't let in the public debate, you know, what our sources and methods of analyzing intelligence, or who the sources and methods were. And the Nunes memo that I read after it was declassified had none of that in it. It talked about a timeline, but a lot of that was, you know, already in the public press. And if it's in the public press, there's no need to keep it classified.
But the surveillance warrant was not in the public press. That's the point.
Well,
the surveillance warrant was given the first time, and then it was issued twice. And that's what they were talking about.
But
they were aware when it began, sir.
Yeah.
But they weren't aware of what done. And I'm glad that this particular document did redact. But the point is that they would tell the other one was not.
But what was not redacted is, you know, Senators Grassley and Lindsey Graham, you know, have seen the applications for the surveillance warrant. You know, and that's the key thing, because that's what is. Excuse me.
I'm sorry. Sorry to clarify. Sorry, clarifying.
Yeah, I've read this memo. You know, the thing is that what they did is, you know, they said that all of the applications for the surveillance warrants to the FISA court were based on the fact that, you know, they thought that Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele was credible. Now, before the inauguration, then FBI Director Comey went to the president-elect and said that what is in the dossier that is in question was salacious and unverified. You know, which means that you know, they didn't think that you know, what Christopher Steele doing, you know, was on the up and up. After that meeting, then Rod Rosenstein, where the meeting where Trump was told it was salacious and not verified, then Rod Rosenstein signed another application to the FISA court, you know, saying the same thing that was said before this information was given to President-elect Trump by then FBI Director Comey. That's where the disconnect occurs, and I think we need an answer to that. Now, I think that the application for the warrant should be declassified, and everybody ought to see that, you know, to see if what is stated in this memo is true. But, you know, the fact is that if it was something that divulged sources and methods, the big black line would have been put through it by the FBI, just like it did with a lot of the other things that were in this memo.
Well, what you're saying about being salacious, that was taken out of context, and the Democrats in that committee dispute that. Furthermore,
well, then why did Comey tell it to the president-elect?
Well,
it was taken out of context. That's the issue.
Rod Rosenstein, as the Deputy Attorney General, he would only renew that warrant if there was no information, and that's the way FISA warrants work.
I know, I've been trying to revise the FISA Act for years.
And getting back to Christopher Steele, let's get back to the big picture. You had Christopher Steele, you know, he was aware of just suspicious contacts between Russia and Donald Trump. And he saw that Russia had hacked our election, hacked the emails and released those. And he did the right thing. He said, hey, I'm aware of this, and he passed it on to the FBI so that we can protect our democracy.
Well, if he did the right thing, sir, then
Sir?
why has the chairman and vice chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee sent this document over to the Justice Department
Because
that
they're
says
trying to-
accordingly we are referring Christopher Steele to the Department of Justice for investigation of potential violations of 18 United States Code 1001?
Sir, my response to that, the reason is, I believe, they're trying to obstruct. They're trying to protect Trump, and they are trying to, the reason why they do that is because they are afraid that
Okay. One more interruption like this, and the meeting will be adjourned. Cool it. We'll keep on
yeah,
the
please
floor.
don't. We don't want this to be adjourned. Please don't.
Ask the question.
Thank you. Okay.
Going.
So, I respect Lindsey Graham. I respect Chuck Grassley. But what they did was irresponsible, in my opinion, because they're trying to obstruct the investigation. That's what they're trying to do. That was the reason for that. And I think if you compare Christopher Steele to people like Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and Don Jr., who didn't tell the FBI about what was happening, that was what they should have done.
Well,
And I'll leave it at that.
well, I will just. This is the last time I'm going to have to say this. Is that we're supposed to disagree without being disagreeable. This is not a cheering section. I have adjourned meetings in the past because of the interruptions and the cheering that is going on. I will not hesitate to do so again, and this is going to be the last and final warning. If it happens again, the meeting will be adjourned. Now, to respond to what you were saying, is that if you think that this type of a memo, referring under provisions of law somebody for criminal prosecution is obstruction of justice, then there is no way that the Congress can do any kind of oversight over the Justice Department, without being accused of obstruction of justice. And I want everybody to think about that, because one of the checks and balances that the framers put in the Constitution was oversight, and they gave Congress the oversight role over the executive branch. Now, if you want us to do oversight, then memorandums that were sent to the Justice Department saying that these senators who are on the Judiciary Committee believe that there should be an investigation into anybody for potential violations of the criminal laws of the United States is pure and simple good oversight. And you just think of what the consequences would be if Congress were denuded from doing oversight. We ought to do more of it rather than less.